Everybody. My name is Frank Saida, and I teach here. I teach a couple of classes. I teach the HPRM 4700 class, the Integrative Challenge, which is a capstone course, which is a ton of fun. If you continue on, maybe you'll show up there. And then I teach 4350, which is planning and development. Basically, put yourself in the role of a hotel developer and go through the steps of actually building a hotel. What are the things, what are the steps, what's the roadmap look like to building and ultimately opening a hotel. So it's a lot of fun. Both of the classes have project work, group work, especially the capstone class. That's what I do here at the university, and I get to talk to you guys and spend time with all of you. So why am I here? Well, I can tell you how I got into this business, and it was sort of circuitous. I had no idea I was going to end up in the hospitality business. I really didn't. I was a ball player. I grew up in New York, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I was going to play baseball. That was it. I was all city, all state. My junior year, I signed a letter of intent to go play baseball at a college in the Midwest. And quite honestly, I didn't think beyond that. And then in my senior year of high school, we had a spring season, and this is in New York. It was cold, and I didn't warm up. And I tore a muscle in my elbow. And, this is 1978. And so today they do a procedure called the Tommy John surgery, and they do it pretty much to everybody. But in 1978, I was 17, and it was considered experimental at that time. And to do it to a 17-year-old was pretty rare. And so, my folks looked at me and said, look, you're not really eligible for this procedure. And my dad looked at me and he said, and I don't think you're going to play in the major leagues. So, that's not going to happen for you. And the university that I had signed with said, look, we'd love to have you still come go here, but we're not going to pay for it anymore either. So that posed a problem for me and gave me a moment to reflect. And so, in 8th grade, you take these aptitude tests. I think it's around 8th grade. You take these aptitude tests that say, hey, Frank, you may be good at this, or this may be a career path that you might look at. And hotel management came up. And, my back was a little bit against the wall. Let's remember, it's spring of my senior year of high school. And so I said, hotel management. I like hotels. I've always had a good experience at hotels. And I really thought, I was like, well, how complicated a major can that be? How rigorous a course of study can that be? There can't be a whole lot of math in there. And so I looked at a couple of schools, and so I ended up going to Niagara University in upstate New York, Niagara Falls, New York, and they had a hospitality management program. And so there was, I was on my way. Now, here, hotel management, hospitality management, education has evolved quite a bit. It is a little bit more complicated than it was back then. We have things today for hotels like revenue management, and there's just a lot of data involved, and data analysis and data synthesis. But then, everything was manual. So, the most complicated machine I had to deal with was an NCR 4200 machine, which was just a big adding machine that just had a big crank that went like that. You know, I had to take a statistics class, and for those of you who have taken a statistics class or are about to take a statistics class, that will probably be some of the most important material you will use moving forward in your lives. And I also want to remind you that I will never, as I talk and in any of my classes, I never use the term real world. Like, you know, a lot of people talk, instructors and people who lecture say, well, someday, students, when you're in the real world, I will not insult you that way, because you couldn't be more in the real world than you are today. Some of you have rents, you have jobs, you have relationship issues, you have car troubles, you have all the makings of a real life. It doesn't get any more real than that. So I won't insult you that way. So I get to Niagara University, beautiful place, idyllic. You know, the way I looked at university life back then, it was just kind of like high school with ashtrays. Everything was just bigger, new faces, new kids, new experiences. And I really liked the curriculum, you know, once I got beyond some of the general studies. But I had a teacher who was kind of like me. He was an industry guy. He was the general manager of the Niagara Falls Hilton. And he came up to me one day and he said, you know, Frank, you're a decent student. You appear to be engaged in class, and you appear to enjoy this field of study. And he said, let me ask you, have you ever worked in a hotel? And I said, I haven't. And this was coming to the end of my freshman year. And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, he said, you know, I don't want to take the wind out of your sails. He said, but you know, if you're really thinking that this is a career for you, you should probably start working in hotels like this summer. You know, you may not like the business. Now, I grew up in the restaurant business, right? My grandfather owned restaurants in New York. And I knew after one summer working in one of his restaurants that I did not want to be in the restaurant business. You know, it just wasn't for me. I was probably the worst busboy ever. I mean, I was such a bad busboy that they moved me over to just butter and water. I didn't like the way the kitchen smelled. You know, kitchens don't smell like the food they're putting out. You know, it's kind of the smell of something cooking mixed with a grease trap, mixed with people, mixed with burnt stuff. I mean, to this day, the back of the house of a restaurant still takes me back to that sort of scared feeling I had the first time I was in one of his kitchens. And so I knew immediately that I did not want to work in the restaurant business, or even F&B for that matter. So I came home that summer, and I walked around the streets of Manhattan, and I got myself a job working at the front desk at a hotel called the Mayflower on Central Park West, which is kind of, if you've been to New York, there's Columbus Circle, and this hotel was maybe 2 or 3 blocks from Columbus Circle. And let me tell you, I thought I had reached nirvana. This was, you know, an upscale boutique hotel, and people I had seen on TV and in the movies and in professional sports stayed there, and I was helping them, and I was checking them in, and I was bringing stuff to their room, and they were calling me by my name. You know, they needed me to help them with stuff. And I was just so in love with working at a front desk. You know, if you've worked at a front desk, or you look at if you look at a front desk, you know, the desk is here, it's kind of elevated. Excuse me, the canned lighting is above you. It really felt like a stage to me. And this was my domain. I was in charge of of this area and taking care. You know, the nobility of the work found me pretty quickly. And, you know, I hope at some point in your careers, no matter what you're doing, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it's in hospitality or business administration, whatever it is, that you're able to find the nobility in the work. And that's different than that whole saying, you know, if you do something you love, then you'll never work a day in your life. The nobility, and for me in the hotel business, it was easy. You know, we're providing lodging, you know, and then I even went back and thought about the history of the hotel business. You know, it's been around forever. You know, back beyond the Bible, there were inns. You read old literature, there's always an innkeeper, there's a pub, there's a tavern that's got rooms. So it's been around forever, and the notion of hospitality, I mean, the romance of it even made me want to stay in this business even longer. And so when I got back to school, you know, I immediately went to this instructor and said I loved it. It was great. Yeah, it had its moments. People get upset. Things don't go right. But, you know, I was there to solve problems, think on my feet, make mistakes, all of those things. The following summer, I worked in reservations at another hotel in New York, and you know, I had really found my calling. You know, it was just, I was, you know, #blessed. You know, it was just, I really felt good about things. And so when I got out of college, when I got done with school, you know, I was a little stressed. You know, the rigors of university. You know, I decided to take a couple of months off and just kind of find myself. And which basically meant I went to the beach just about every day and hung out. You see, my grandmother had given me an apartment to stay in for 6 months in Brooklyn, and so it was probably 2 months moving into the third month when I'm pretty certain it was my father. He said something to the effect, yes?
The way you talk about your professor that started you in the business, did he become a mentor to you, or do you still, do you think he became?
That's a really good question. We kept in touch. I talked about my experiences with him, what I liked. He gave me some advice about what to do next, and you know, once I left Niagara and went back home to the city, we kind of lost touch. When I went back up there to do some work, we had a dinner and everything. So it was a relationship, but he wasn't a mentor. He was more of an inspiration. Let's put it that way. There was not a real formal mentorship, but I do owe that much, because every time I tell this story, I always mention that. He's gone to the big check-in in the sky. So I got out of school, and you know, looking for a job was different then than it is today. What we did then was we had our resume, and we would print it, and we had a cover letter, and we would do a direct mailing, right? So today you go out on the internet, you drop stuff off here, you apply for jobs here and there. So I just did a direct mailing to all the general managers of, you know, the hotels that I wanted to work at. And lo and behold, I get a call from the general manager of the St. Moritz Hotel, which was on Central Park South, another spectacular hotel. And they want to talk to me about a sales manager job. And I hadn't done any sales, I didn't know anything about sales. And I get this job, because I can interview well, right? You know, I knew how to interview. I'd had some preparation for interviewing at school. Plus, by now, working in a hotel, I had developed my own philosophy about hospitality. And at some point, you guys will develop your own philosophy about hospitality. You know, you'll have a vision of what hospitality means to you. And for me, and I was talking to class today about it, it was always a symphony for me, right? Not that I'm a classical music buff by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm always amazed if you've ever been to a symphony's rehearsal, right? You go to their rehearsal and it sounds terrible, right? You know, there's like 50 musicians and they're all doing their own thing and they're warming up. They've got 50 different sets of music. And there's one guy who's trying to lead them all by doing this. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But then when they pull it all together, it's beautiful. You know, all these people working together to make this beautiful music. And so that was always the way I had a vision of, you know, a hotel working in unison like that, because there's so many different parts and each one is dependent upon the other. And I shared that with the general manager of this hotel, and lo and behold, I get this job. I'm the corporate sales manager for the St. Moritz Hotel in New York, and I had this amazing office. Looked over Central Park and shared it with a guy who did become my mentor, this little Asian fella, Mickey Shong, who back then you'd smoke in the offices, right? And so he was a chain smoker. And he was constantly telling me, don't do this, do this, do this, don't do that, you're doing that wrong. And so there was no sales training. So today, you know, when you join a hotel or you join any organization of substance and you're going to be working in sales, there's pretty rigorous training. You know, you learn about the product, you learn about their pricing, you learn about some sales techniques. So my training was, you know, they gave me a rate. They were like, Frank, the corporate rate you're here to sell is $91. And down the block is the GM building, which is no longer the GM building today. But if you've been to New York, you know where that Apple store is, the one that looks like the Louvre, that glass building. And behind it is what was the GM building. And they said, go to the GM building, get in the elevator, go all the way to the top floor, and just start knocking on every door. And tell them, and say this to them, say, do you ever bring people into town? And if you do, I'd like to talk to you about the St. Moritz Hotel, which at the time was owned by Leona Helmsley. And so this way dates me, but Leona Helmsley was the ultimate queen of hospitality in New York. Her husband, Harry Helmsley, paid 1/4 of all the property tax on the island of Manhattan. And you know, all of these things just had so much cachet. I was pinching myself. And so that's what I did. I got in the elevator, I went to the top, and that took about a week and a half. And by the time I got to the bottom of that building, I had a shtick. I had a spiel, you know? I had some modest success at doing it. And then I got to another building and it just got, you know, it was almost like cognitive behavior therapy. You know, you keep doing the same thing over and over again. And you know, I would have a boss who'd come out with me every so often just to make sure that I was saying the right things and doing it properly and getting some tweaks and fine tuning. And after about 3 months, you know, I was having a lot more success. And I did that for about 1.5 years, and I got to go into some of the coolest offices. And I know this sounds all so romantic, but that's exactly how it was. That's exactly how it was. And I had more money than I knew what to do with. My salary was $13,500. And this is 1982. My salary was $13,500. I didn't have rent because I was still living, you know, Grandma was still living down in Florida with her second husband, so she maintained the Brooklyn apartment. And, you know, I had an American Express card and a Sears card. And I had a Sears card because Sears owned Budget Rent-A-Car. Remember that? So I could rent cars with my Sears card. And then the GM of that hotel, he told me, he goes, you know, Frank, you're doing a good job in sales. He said, but I see you as somebody with potential in this business. And he goes, I think you're going to learn a lot more about this business if we move you to night manager. And we make you the night manager of this hotel. And, night manager pretty much means that you're in charge of the hotel from like 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. And it was daunting. I mean, I had a crew of guys who were also helping me add up the numbers, because a hotel goes through the accounting cycle, the entire accounting cycle every day. And a lot of people who are going through school, through university, are night auditors because you work that night shift, you take afternoon classes, and it all works. And I did that. And, although, it had its drawbacks. First of all, working that graveyard shift. Anybody work graveyard shift? Yeah, so graveyard shift is weird, right? Because you never feel like you're in sync with the rest of the world, kind of. So like, happy hour for you is like 8 o'clock in the morning, and in New York, there's a whole subculture. There's a whole world that works that shift. So there were bars and nightclubs that catered to that crowd. And so there were plenty of times, that I'd be going home on the train, and I'd be liquored up at 10 o'clock in the morning to the bejesus, and I could see the normal people looking at me going like, oh, he's so young. Oh, poor guy. But I wanted to tell them, I work graveyard, which is another thing to be mindful of, guys, that this industry is ridiculously social. And you are surrounded by alcohol. There is tons of opportunities to be fueled by, narcotics and drugs, and the adrenaline rushes are high, and there are lulls in the day. And so there are tons of pitfalls. I have seen many of my counterparts go down because of alcoholism and drug addiction. And it doesn't mean just people who are working on the line. I mean people senior executives. The guy who founded Microtel, which is a substantial brand and a national player, in early 2000, and I know this is passé to say now, but, in early 2000, the guy died of an overdose, heroin, in early 2000. So he was ahead of the curve. So, I want you to be mindful of these pitfalls, because, you work 11 to 7, you work 3 to 11, let's go out, because, the stress of being on, right? And that's what you have to be on. When you're working in the hospitality industry, you don't really get to have a bad day. You may have a bad day, but you better not let your customers see that. Here's the thing, is that you've got to get into character when you walk into work, right? Customers don't care if, you had a row with your significant other at home, or your parental units are getting on your case, or, whatever the case may be. So, a big part of being successful in this business is the ability to get in character, and sometimes you just got to act as if, and there's a lot of stress involved with that. And so when you can, turn that off and take that deep breath, well, running out and blowing off some steam sounds like a good time, but you do that 5-6 times a week. So, things progressed. I had the opportunity to open up the Marriott Marquis in New York. You see it every New Year's Eve, right? It's where they do New Year's Rockin' Eve. It was probably the most exciting hotel project in New York at the time, right in Times Square. Before Times Square was, I don't know if anybody saw that special on HBO, The Deuce, that show. Well, that's what Times Square was like, and that's when we opened up the Marriott Marquis there, before it was this pedestrian mall that it is today, Disneyified. So we would close the doors at midnight, 1 o'clock, and if you were a guest and you were out of the hotel, chances are it would take you about 25 minutes to get our attention to get you back in, because we didn't leave the doors open, and that was way before electronic keys. I was the night manager there, and women who, hookers were constantly at our bar, and so part of what I had to do was, security. We would identify them and ask them to leave, and so I was there for 2 years, and so you see the same ones over and over again, and they also see your face. So it wasn't that unusual for me to have a night off and be walking around the hotel, and the same thing happened at St. Moritz, and I'd be walking with a date, and I'd be walking down the street and have one of them go, "Oh, hi, Frank." And have a date go, "Why does that she know you?" And you have to explain that, and so things progress. I get transferred to Chicago. I get to work at a couple of other hotels there in different positions. This was all I knew, was the hotel business, and this is all it was going to be for me. There was nothing else. And so I wanted to get back into sales. I had worked in operations for a number of years. I was working at a hotel called the Lenox House Suites, which was an early extended stay hotel. So extended stay hotels, super profitable. Their target is guests who are going to stay 5 nights or longer, right? So 5 nights or longer consecutively. So I'm on the road. I'm on a business trip for the Lenox House, and I get a call from a guy who's building a hotel in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm a newlywed, and he tells me about this hotel he's building, this Homewood Suites hotel. It sounds great. He asked me if I'd like to be the director of sales opening this property. And I said, yeah, sure. And it was closer to where we were living. And it was the 5th Homewood Suites. And I did that for 4 years. And then I get a call from some people here in Memphis, Tennessee, right? It was already bad enough that I had made this adjustment from moving west of the Hudson River to Chicago, where the news came on at 10 o'clock. And I get a call to interview and talk to these people about a job in Memphis, Tennessee, way beyond the Mason-Dixon line. And but it was a really great opportunity working for a company called Promise, being a director of field marketing for Hampton Inns. So I think everybody's heard of Hampton Inns, but at that time there were only about 300 or 400 Hampton Inns, and so my job as director of field marketing would have been to help owners open these Hampton Inns with marketing programs, operational situations, and kind of broker resources to them. And it sounded so exciting, and it was about 80% travel, that I took the job, moved my family here, and I have been to, that job took me to every state in the United States, all 50 states. And I mean, I went to every shithole city that had a Walmart, a gas station, and a Chinese restaurant, because that's where we opened up a Hampton Inn. And now there's 2,100 Hampton Inns. I opened up over 400 Hampton Inns in 4 years. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. And I learned a ton about beyond just keeping guests happy, managing ownership's expectations, working within a corporate environment, you know, the politics involved there. I had no idea that these kinds of opportunities existed in the hotel business. You see, when I got into the hotel business, all I wanted to be was a general manager of one of these big full-service hotels in New York, because I thought that was the top of the heap. I thought that was the end game. And then, you know, the industry changed. They started building hotels like Hampton Inn and Homewood Suites and Embassy Suites. And these big hotel companies, other than Marriott and Hilton, showed up. Companies like Promise and these bigger management companies. And so after doing that for a while, Promise developed a brand called Hampton Inn and Suites, which was a hybrid of a Homewood Suite and a Hampton Inn. And they said, Frank, because you've got Homewood experience and Hampton experience now, we want you to lead the efforts for that brand. And so I launched that brand and did that for a number of years. And you know, that was even different experiences. And then I came full circle and I led the support organization for Homewood Suites and the other extended stay brands at Hilton. We were bought by Hilton. And, you know, getting bought by a company is great for the stakeholders, the shareholders of a company. But if you're an employee of a company that's bought, a big company that's bought, it is nerve-wracking, fear-inducing, because you have no idea what these people want to do with the company. All you can hope is that they like what you're doing. All you can hope is that they don't look at your area and say, this is more of an expense than it is a revenue generating area. And I saw hundreds of people get let go. I saw hundreds of people get early retirements. I saw hundreds of people stranded in Memphis because these were high-paying jobs in the hospitality industry in Memphis, and there was no other job like these in Memphis. And it's still kind of that way with Hilton. Now there's some other opportunities like that, but scary, scary times. And you know, I kept my head low. You know, you keep your head down. You look up when they tell you to look up, and you do the best job you can. And I continued to see that nobility in the work I was doing. And nothing really changed for me. You know, I kept talking about the symphony to my owners. I learned lessons along the way. You know, I failed at a bunch of stuff, but I didn't stop trying new things. I played devil's advocate along the way too. You know, sometimes, you know, my bosses would come up with an idea that maybe I didn't think was a good idea. And I would say, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Because people get comfortable in corporate positions and they lose touch with what's going on in the field. And so they don't understand that their idea has impact further down the road. And so I always felt like it was my responsibility to let them know how this is going to impact the people working at the front desk of our hotels or the housekeepers in our hotels. You know, that was really where I really felt like I was at my best, was working directly with the hotels. I didn't love sitting in the meeting rooms, you know, with other executives and talking doo-doo, right? Saying phrases like, well, you know, at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, you know, we're going to have a paradigm shift here, and that's going to mean that, you know, we're going to have to really look inside ourselves and make some really hard decisions about, you know, this activity or that activity. That was, you know, that's not why I got into this business, was to sit and be an executive. You know, my love was always with the field and working with hotels and owners and solving problems and creating efficiencies and things that helped make their lives a little better. I had this huge engine filled with resources called Hilton. And I wanted to make sure that they were getting every bit out of it that they were paying for. Because Hilton, like most big companies, is a labyrinth. And it's really super hard to navigate. Sometimes, you know, we would have people there who would just tell them, well, just go to the website and you'll find it. Just go to the website. You know, there's a zillion tabs, it changes, it just, you know. But Hilton's a good company. They were super good to me. I was overpaid, overfed, over-traveled. You know, I got to do some of the coolest things. It's hard to, I got to meet so many great people. I got to experience so many things that I never, ever thought hospitality could take me to. I never in a million years would I ever have thought that when I was, 17 and I had hurt my arm and I had nowhere to go and hotel management fell into my lap, that I could end up in Memphis, Tennessee, getting to do some amazing things and getting up and sharing these things with students. So in 2014, I decided that, I'd done just about, everything I really kind of had wanted to do. There was always more. There were more initiatives. The business was changing a little bit. And so, I left Hilton. And the first thing I knew I wanted to do was to teach and to come and share my experiences with folks who were getting into this business. Because I saw so many people coming out of school to us who weren't necessarily prepared for what lay ahead. Who may have spent their noses in books, who hadn't spent enough time working in hotels, and who hadn't had any real leadership training or management training. Today what happens, and it still happens, right? You may be very good at a specific discipline in your job. Let's just say you're a bellman, and you may be the best bellman at that hotel. So what do they end up doing with you? They put you in charge of the bellman, right? Now you're in charge of the bellman, but they don't give you any management training. They don't give you any leadership training. So now you're leading a team of your friends, and you're making the hard decisions, you're scheduling, you may have a small budget to, how much time do I have?
15 minutes.
Oh, fantastic. So
Plus Q&A.
Right. So you may have a small budget to handle, you've got HR issues, you've got drama, and you've been given no training to do that. All you know is that you were the best doggone bellman that this hotel had, and now you're doing this. And so, one of the things we do in the class that I teach is we talk about, how to lead people. What does it take to lead? What does it take to manage? And it takes doing those things I talked about, getting in character, learning what your management style is, knowing what you don't like in a manager. For example, how many people have ever worked in a place where the first thing you did when you walked in was you went to another coworker and said, hey, what kind of mood is the boss in today? Right? You ever work in a place like that? Right? Well, the first thing you should know is that you don't ever want to be that kind of a leader. Right? And that's all part of getting in character, because when you walk in a bad mood, or with your head down and immediately want to go into your office, you know what you're doing. You are giving tacit approval to everybody else in that organization to do the same thing, right? It's like that Spider-Man saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Everybody is watching you. They're watching what you do, what you say, how you do it. Your body language is being observed. because we say so much more with our bodies than we do with our words. And your guests are looking at that, but more importantly, the people that you're supposed to lead, they see that. So, you know, that overused phrase, lead by example, behave with integrity, right? What the hell is integrity? Do we even know? Do you know what your values are? Right? Do you know these things? Do you know what's important to you? Honesty, dependability. I mean, if these things are really important to you, then you got to look at the way you're living. And if you're living that way, boom, hats off. But you may say that these things are important to you, but are you living that way, and are you working that way, and are you acting that way? Because I can tell you that everybody is watching you. And you don't get a second chance. It's not like you can be Mr. or Mrs. Integrity and Honesty one day, and then the next day be, I'm in a don't touch me mood, so I don't want to deal with you today. Can't do that. So there's a consistency that comes with it. More so in our business than a lot of other businesses. Accountants can get away with it. Nobody expects hospitality out of an accountant. I go see my tax guy in a couple of weeks, and I don't expect Morris to be delightful. I don't expect any, hey, great job. You made this much money, you're going to have to pay this much taxes. Way to go. That's not what I expect from my tax accountant, right? But I do expect from the servers at the restaurant I like to go to say, hey, Mr. Saeed, I'm glad to see you. You know, how you been? Have you thought out? All of that stuff. So there's different expectations, you know, and your workers, the people you work with, they even have really high expectations for their bosses. Because, you know, you've heard that phrase, people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And that still holds true today. So I challenge each and every one of you, because we all want to lead at some point. We all want to, you know, whatever it is, that's why you're here, you know, to really take a good hard look and say, do I have a vision? Do I know what my values are? And will I take the time to make sure that I lead that way and inspire others to serve that way? That's the only way hospitality establishments are successful, is with a great leader. So today I teach, I work with management companies as a consultant. I help guys buy and sell hotels. I write fiction, and you know, love to play golf and watch the Yankees and do all that sort of stuff. So, questions? Questions. I'm ready. What's that? Here. Yeah. Right here, University of Memphis. 47 HPRM 4700 and 4350.
When you folks are juniors and seniors, you'll take Frank.
I really dig the Grateful Dead. I've been to over 170 shows. Yes.
What made you become a writer? Why did you write fiction?
You know, it was a funny thing. I started journaling, and so my journaling turned into little recaps of weekends, and then I just started writing short stories. I had a couple of short stories published, and then one short story turned into a novel, and that got published. And so, yeah, it was just like most things in my life, I kind of fell into it. And so,
The name of your novel?
1 Hour Martinizing. It's out on Amazon. Came out in 2008. So I'm working on the second one right now.
That was a cleaner, Martinizing cleaner.
Yes. Yes. You'll see the connection. Yes.
So like in between the tough moments, like when you were going from different positions, like when it was tough, what motivated you to keep going?
Two different things, great question. So what motivated me? You know, when I was single and didn't have any responsibilities, you know, didn't have a family and all that sort of stuff, you know, the biggest motivator was I had some bills to pay, but I also wanted to continue on in this business, and so I knew that I had to just keep persevering, that it was going to happen. So yeah, there was a couple of gaps between the Algonquin and the Marriott Marquis, right? When I didn't have work because I'd accepted this job with the Marquis, but there was a lapse there, and so yeah, you know, I knew I had. Then whenever there was a gap, right? Because there's always going to be a gap. I had responsibility. I had a wife, I had kids, and I had to put food on the table. And my wife works, but so I wanted to work. You know, I'm not going to say I'm somebody who just loves to work. I mean, I like my ass on the couch just as much as the next guy. You know, I'm not type AAA. I got to be working. You know, but. You know, family obligations, spirit to serve, that sort of stuff. Yes?
Why'd you choose to stay here instead of moving back to like New York or something?
You know, I've been down here for over 20 years, and this place has grown on me, the pace of living, you know, the cost of living. My wife still works down here. We have a place at Pickwick that, you know, I just love going to. So, you know, like I said, I've been to just about every place in the continental United States, and you know, moving is a funny thing. Living in different places. So my philosophy is this: you go from one place to the next. You get to a new place, and so what do? You find the things you need. So you find a dry cleaner, you find a bunch of restaurants, you find a house, all of those things. And then you just spend the rest of your time upgrading those things, like, oh, I didn't like this dry cleaner, but here's a better one. I've been here longer, I found this. Oh, this restaurant's better than that. So you just keep finding better things the longer you stay. So I kind of know where everything is here. New York is ridiculously expensive to live. Plus, you know, New York is for young people, right, who have a ton of energy, or it's for super wealthy people who have a ton of money and a lot of time. So I visit. I still have family up there. I'm up there a couple of times a year, usually taking a couple of Yankee games, and so I like it here. I do. Yes.
What was your favorite position you worked in?
Working at a front desk. It really was. That was that and leading that support team at Homewood. You know, but the front desk got me hooked, and then leading that support team was probably where I felt the most helpful, productive, and that's where I did probably some of my best work. Was there. Yeah, and I had a lot of fun. And that's the other thing. Don't take yourselves too serious. Really, always remember what it is you're doing. You know, I used to have to remind my team all the time because they would get wrapped around the axle. They'd come into my office with their hair on fire, you know, and be like, whoa, there's no such thing as a training emergency. You know, the hotel will get open, these people will get through their training, it's gonna be okay. You know, let's just remember what we're doing in the hotel business. We keep our hotel looking like new, we exceed our guests' expectations, and we collect the money properly. It's, you know, we can complicate it with stuff, you know, like I was talking about revenue management and, you know, lots of other stuff, but at its core, it's a super simple business. Yeah.
In all of these hotels that you were at, did they have adequate training of personnel to be in that job or even upgrade or sideways to another job?
Up until about here, up until about 94, no. No. They did. It was trial by fire, shadow somebody, and I think that's all, that speaks to the industry as well, that training became more regimented, required, and also owners and big hotel companies saw the switch from training being, instead of it being an expense, they saw it as being an investment.
The paradigm shift.
Yeah, yeah. But it goes back and forth. It goes back and forth. So training is important. We can never do too much.
These are pretty well-known names. Do they train their personnel, employees? So
Today they all do.
They do?
They all do today. Yeah, they all do. And in all different varieties, you know, from online, classroom, one-on-one, all of those methods are used because we know today that people learn, everybody learns differently. You know, some folks really dig and need the classroom, where other folks are perfectly fine with online training. Me, I'm classroom and experiential. I'm easily distracted with online, and I'm a little bit of a cheater.
You did say honesty, right?
Yeah.
As a value.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
you know, you take that, you know, at the end, the knowledge check, you know, I know that they're gonna give me 3 chances, so, you know, sometimes I go right to, so, you know, training comes in different forms and it works best for different people in different ways. Yeah.
What else do you have for Frank? Any other questions, comments? Career counseling. All right, let's hear it for him.
Cheers.